Well, the first part that I had to deal with COVID was, of course, owning a business. And then when all the shutdowns happened, having to deal with that. Beyond that, the next thing that I had to deal with COVID was when my father got COVID, and he actually died from COVID. He was actually taking my mother over to an appointment in Asheville, and on the way home, he started getting some chills, and that was unusual for him. He was the type of person who, as long as I've lived, I never know that he had a cold or sore throat or flu or anything like that ever. So whenever he said he had some chills, my mom was talking to me on the phone and told me, and I said, well, that just doesn't sound like Dad. So why don't we get him tested? He felt fine other than the chills. So then on that Wednesday, he felt fine, and I talked to him on the phone, and he felt fine. And then he got his result back Wednesday, and it was positive. And Thursday, he still felt fine, pretty good. And then Friday, he started getting some aches, body aches, kind of like the flu kind of feeling, but still no real temperature or anything like that, no cough at that point. And then Friday, I was taking some groceries over after work about 2 o'clock, and of course my mother and my sister who lived at home with him were all quarantined from the time that he went to get tested. I told them to stay at home and quarantine and isolate within the house, stay away from him until they knew for sure. So they did, and at that point he still had no cough and was doing pretty well, other than just some achy things like the flu. And then by the time I got home, I called back. His cough was starting to get worse. At that point, I wasn't really sure where we were going at that point. So I went ahead and called the EMS, and they transported him to the hospital. And when he got there, they did some things, and he already had COVID pneumonia in both lungs. And he had barely even a little cough. I mean, it would be something like maybe if somebody had a little allergy or something, that kind of cough is all he had. And it was already bilateral COVID pneumonia at that point Friday night. So they admitted him, and he stayed in the hospital Friday night. He was able to get the plasma treatment, and he was able to get the remdesivir and some other treatments that the COVID patients get. He got everything. And then Sunday, everything started kind of improving. He was on a lot of oxygen, but his labs and everything were looking a little bit better. And then Monday, he took a turn for the worse. And I was at work, and the hospital called me at work and said, we're going to have to put your dad on a ventilator. And, we're going to give you a minute or two to talk to him before we do that. And so I talked to Dad a few minutes, and then they went ahead and did the ventilator. And then on Tuesday, he passed away. So he went in the hospital on Friday with barely a little cough and some aches and pains, and he died on Tuesday. That's how fast his was. It was tough. One of the worst things about it, as a family dealing with a person with COVID, is that you're not allowed to go in the hospital. Unfortunately, my dad didn't have like a smartphone or anything like that. He was old school when it comes to that. So we didn't, there was no FaceTime or video call or anything like that. But he passed away on that Tuesday, and then the way it kind of worked is that whenever his heart was stopping, they were doing CPR, and the doctor called us at that point, called the family in, and we were allowed to go into the hospital at that point. But by the time we got there, it was too late. So he had already passed away. So he was 68 years old, very healthy, worked every day. He owned a restaurant here in town. And so he was just the type of person that went wide speed, full open, a mile a minute. Just never, hardly ever missed a day of work. He was just never a sick person. You don't know, like they did the contact tracing on him, and he never figured out like exactly, where it came from. The only places, that he had really been those days that he would have contacted the virus was just the gas station, and then one of the stores to get some things to mow grass and stuff like that with. So I think as a family, what helped the most was that as soon as he got tested, I made him isolate. So he had his own room to himself, and he used his own bathroom, and he was away from my mother and my sister. And then while in the house, if he did have to go somewhere else in the house, which he tried not to, but if he did, everybody had masks. They stayed masked up. They had plenty of cleaning supplies to clean anything and everything. And then that really helped them because, you know, in the public, it's very unclear, like when you do have somebody that tests, if they're just waiting on the results, well, what does everybody else do in the house? Are they supposed to wait and go anywhere? Or are they supposed to wear a mask? Are they supposed to stay away from that person? Take them his food and medicine and this and that, but, you know, limit your exposure to him until we know. And it was very hard to do because for the first few days, he didn't really have any symptoms other than a little aches and pains. And so that was a hard thing. But, you know, looking back, I'm glad because it kept my sister negative the entire time. And then my mother, she stayed negative until about a week after my dad passed, and then she was positive. And so she was testing. Her and my sister were both testing after my dad passed because we, you know, went into the COVID unit there at the hospital. And so they were testing just preventatively to make sure they were okay before they went back out in, you know, out of quarantine. And then my sister was still negative. Unfortunately, my mom was positive at that point, and she had no symptoms. And so, and it devastated us when we heard that she was positive because, you know, for me, I was like, I could lose my entire family because they all live in the same house. But she, you know, was able to recover without having to be hospitalized. My dad's cousin, Becky Fullenweiner, she came down with it just, you know, about a month ago. It hasn't been that long. And she was actually in her 50s, but she just got, you know, COVID basically helping somebody else out. And hers went pretty good at first, and she had to go into the hospital, and then she got to go home, and then she took a turn for the worse. And then she went the same path as my daddy. She got all the treatments and then had to get the ventilator and then died the next day. And she was young, you know, had young, you know, fairly, you know, young children, college-age kids. And so just too soon to die, basically. And then on my husband's side of the family, his great aunt, she got COVID. Again, it's the same way. Got a lot of different treatments and ventilation, and then died a day or two later. And so she was in her 80s, but still up to that point had been, you know, a healthy person. There's nobody that, you know, can say, there's no way I can get COVID. You know, it can strike anybody. And I do believe in wearing the mask, and I do believe in, you know, washing your hands, good hygiene, keeping your distance from people is very important. Because you don't know, like there's so many people out there that have like just little mild symptoms like my dad did, and you don't know that that's COVID or not. But you know, he was tested, and while he was waiting on his results, they did everything they were supposed to do, and I truly believe that helped a whole lot. You have to do it. So I've seen like the devastating effects of this virus, and you may get a case that's real light and mild and be fine, or you could get one like my dad and don't make it. I mean, I just think it's a simple thing to do. So, I mean, it's like, you know, you wear it, you know, after a few days, you're kind of used to it. So it doesn't really affect you too bad. You know, there's all kinds of people say, I can't breathe with a mask, you know, and I can't do this and I can't do this, or I have asthma and can't do this or that or whatever. But, you know, to me, like, with asthma and COPD and things like that, if you have that and you're out grocery shopping or whatever you're doing, you're the person that really needs to wear the mask, because if you get COVID, then it's going to be even a whole lot harder to breathe. Whenever you have COVID, like my dad, and bilateral COVID pneumonia, you feel like you're suffocating. So it's kind of like, you know, it's a small preventative thing, and you're doing it to not only protect yourself, but also to keep, if you have it, other people from getting it. Because if if you have something, you sure don't want to share it with anybody else, and especially if it's deadly like it was for my dad. Just wearing the mask, and maybe you might save a life. And even with the holiday season coming up, I mean, that's been tough because we haven't lost a family member that's there at Christmas and Thanksgiving every year. So going through the holidays, it's tough because we don't have that person there. And it's the fact of that's always going to be a picture in our minds that he died of COVID. And I want everybody to know it because he knew everybody. He didn't meet a stranger. He was the most people person type of guy you'd ever meet. And so I think it does put a face to the disease. So coming up into Christmas and this holiday season, things are going to be a lot different. But please wear a mask and protect your family members so that they will be here for the next holiday. Unlike my dad, we will definitely be missing him this Christmas.